Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and since 2010, I've run the Songwriters on Process website, where you can find more than 200 conversations with songwriters about the creative process. I'm not here to talk about tour stories, band drama, how a band got its name, or favorite foods. My goal is to treat songwriters as writers, plain and simple. This is an intelligent conversation about the writing process between two writers. And today's interview is with George Clarke and Kerry McCoy of Deafheaven. You know, I would love to do more metal interviews on this site. I grew up with metal. It's been a love of my life. I mean, it was the first music I really got into as a young kid. And I don't have enough metal interviews on here, so I really enjoyed talking to these two guys. We did this interview again back in August of 2021, and Deafheaven's latest album, Infinite Granite, is out now on Sargent House. What I thought was interesting about this, so just as far as what these two guys do in the band, George Clarke writes the lyrics and Kerry McCoy writes much of the music. And for both of them, it's about putting themselves in the best possible headspace to make something. For McCoy, that happens to be surfing. He tries to go every morning because it's one of the few times in his life where he can purely be in the moment. No watch, no phone, he said. And he did say that more than a few Deafheaven riffs have emerged from his time on the water. For George Clarke, it's a workout, either the gym or running. That's a good way to prepare. So what he does is he works out, and then he drives to their LA studio where they record or write. And for him, it's working out, but either one of them, right? Whether it's surfing or working out, physical activity, very important to the creative process. I've always believed that. So it's not just the process itself that's important. It's the preparation to get to the process. And that's what these guys talked a lot about today. One more thing, George Clarke said, I'm always writing new ideas. I keep notes of things I'm thinking about, things I wake up thinking about. It's mining for new inspiration. But Kerry McCoy told me, I try not to force the songwriting because when I do, the music tends to be very derivative. So a little bit of opposing forces there, but that's why maybe they work so well. Anyway, enjoy my interview with George Clarke and Kerry McCoy of Deafheaven. George, we'll start with you. How much writing are you doing outside of songwriting, if any? I mean, songwriters tend to be often they write in journals or they do poetry or short stories, anything outside of songwriting.
Yeah. I think that I am always sort of in the midst of writing new ideas, even if I'm not writing, say, a specific piece. I'm typically keeping notes of things that I'm thinking about, things I'm waking up thinking about, mining for new inspirations, things like that. I think when say we're quote like off cycle and not strictly working on an album, those things definitely keep up. And occasionally I'll release writing on its own. But I think it always sort of needs to be a forward momentum. And then when we get to a point where we're actually placing them, I can choose between what I've written. And it in that way, it's less strenuous than having to kind of come up with all of the ideas and all the forms in a more immediate way.
So if I hear you correctly, then you're just writing a lot of stuff, in various fashion. And then when it comes time to write songs, you're kind of saying, maybe this could be a song. Like, are you doing, I guess my question is maybe differently. Are you doing writing that is separate from songwriting, like journal writing or stuff like that?
It's all kind of the same, honestly.
It is.
Yeah. And occasionally I'll have poems that I've published on their own that then find their way into songs or partially into songs, and vice versa. I just have I have a central place where I keep all of it, and when it's ready to be used, I go through and I mine, and I find what kind of is emotionally connecting, I guess, what I feel like fits the tone of the song, and then we move from there.
Do you, and Kerry, do you think it's important? Are you playing every day? Like, there's got to be times you don't feel like it. Do you feel like it's important just to create something every day?
No.
Oh,
For me at least, um, there's times where I go through a lot of big stretches of creativity, and that's anything from guitar by myself, or like playing with the bands, or helping other people with their records, or messing around with Ableton or synthesizers or something like that. There's times where I'll go through really intense things where I'm doing it every day. And then there will be long stretches long stretches being like a couple weeks or something like that, where maybe I will sort of get on Ableton once a week or something like that, or I'll sort of pick up the guitar here and there. But I've found, at least in this point in my life, at least, that it's really important for me to not try and force anything, and to let my brain kind of relax and kind of recycle itself in a weird way.
so when you're not creating and it's not happening, that doesn't bother you. You're good with that. Like, you don't get anxious.
No, I don't. I feel almost like, because there's two kinds of creating kind of for me. There's like the stuff I do by myself at home, like I said, on Ableton or synthesizers, or sometimes I will help other people with their records or whatever. And then there's like the band, capital letter, the band creativity. And that, the latter of those is almost like it's almost like a fine-tuned muscle at this point, where when the five of us get in a room together, I don't even have to really do anything. It just kind of turns itself on, and we all know each other so well, and we can read each other's minds, and we're in such a groove that it kind of just like goes back to this, and we get back into the familiar swing of things. So I don't really get concerned at all. I try not to force it, because when I force it is when I find I write a lot of derivative things, or stuff like that.
Yeah. So George, rather than the typical question of, hey, did you write a lot during the pandemic? Or what was it like? I think I'd rather ask you in terms of, how easy is it for you to write under great emotional weight, like independent of the pandemic? George, regardless, do you find that there's a point where emotional weight just makes it difficult for you to write, or is that the easiest time for you to write?
I think that there's a common misconception that people find inspiration in depression. And I think you often hear that that sort of cliche with musicians, especially, like, I can only work when I'm down. And I actually don't find that. I find that my writing is typically a response to those times. I think that when I am feeling periods of depression or anxiety, I tend to not work. I tend to kind of fold into the interior. And then once I can make sense of those feelings, understand the root of them, the cause of them, and then I can in a clearer way jot down what it is that I'm feeling. So I would say that the writing is more a catalyst to those things, not necessarily happening in the duration of.
Hemingway said he could never write about Paris when he was in Paris. He could never write about, Spain when he was in Spain. He needed distance from those things. And I think, right, that's kind of what you're talking about, a little bit about that space that you need.
I think so. Yeah. I think that a lot of all of my writing is reflection. I'm never writing in a moment. Yeah. So I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Kerry, I saw you nodding. Are you that same type of person? I mean, generally when you write, do you need distance from something to be able to write about it, or can you write in the moment?
Yeah. I was mostly agreeing, I feel like, with George, with the the whole tortured artist take. I think that while of course emotions can help create great art and stuff like that. I think one of the biggest not lies or whatever, but is the whole you know, a lot of the thing, especially when it comes to drugs and stuff like that with musicians, and oh, this record's so great because you can tell he's doing this here or this there or whatever or something like that. Well, I do think with certain types of, you know, Sergeant Pepper or whatever can or something like that, you can, there's a good amount of psychedelic influence and stuff, but with the real destructive stuff, you know, as someone who went through something similar to that, I found that it really choked off my creativity. And so when George was talking about, you know, writing pain, great pain, creating great art, I agree with him on that. A lot of it, it's not really something that should be romanticized.
Yeah, we, you know, Kerry and I most people I feel like that are musicians, but especially in the case of our own band, yeah, those kind of things are stoppages. They don't fuel anything. They just kind of, yeah, make everything more difficult.
My PhD is in 20th century American theater, so playwrights like Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams. There is a very, very distinct line between like when they started to get so deep into alcohol, the writing is unreadable. Like, yeah, I mean, we're talking like, you know, Hemingway. I mean, Tennessee Williams, Eugene O'Neill, Williams especially was writing some of those last plays. I mean, I don't know how they got published, and that's kind of a universal feeling, is that you read some of those plays and you compare those to his early masterpieces like, you know, Glass Menagerie, Streetcar Named Desire, and the same. It's just there's a note, like you can tell, okay, here is when he was drinking and drunk all the time, and here's when he wasn't.
Yeah. That's actually really interesting. I was reading Cat on a Hot Tin Roof here, and there's a British author, Olivia Laing, who has this book called Trip to Echo Spring, which chronicles alcoholic American writers.
I've read it. It's a great book.
Yeah, me too. And very good points, because he ends up in a hotel and it's claustrophobic, and it's not the vision that people have, you know, and it very much in reading her account of his life, I think it's much more reflective of the reality of what it means to be a creative person dealing with depression and the things that come from that, alcoholism, drug addiction, etc.
Okay, so let's talk about that ritual then. Kerry, I'll start with you. How important is ritual? The idea, I'm fascinated by the idea of ritual of writers. You know, how important is the idea of ritual to your process, Kerry? Like time of day, place. You know, for me, I know there's a certain chair I like to be in when I write. It means nothing. I just know the mojo is there and it's worked before, so I'll always stay there. But Kerry, how important is that ritual to a good writing process for you?
Again, I would say, outside of the practice, you know, with the band especially, man, I will not shut the hell up. Outside of you know, the certain, let me think. It's really, the time of day does not matter for me. There's certain things before and after that I like to do that are very important to me. I find there are things that I can do that are where I'm in the best possible headspace to, you know, receive whatever universe. A lot of that is I pretty much try and surf every day if I can, pretty early in the morning. And then I like to, depending on the day, like go to the gym after that. And, when I come home from that and I've showered and eaten something and made some coffee or something like that, I will sit down at like the home studio. And that is usually when is like I'm in the best possible mood to make something if it's a day that's going to happen. Again, with a band, it's a thing where it becomes a ritual strictly because of our general schedule. So it's usually a thing of, again, I will try and squeeze surfing in like pretty early, and then be at our practice space up in Tahunga by like 10:30 or so. I think is usually when we do 10:30 or 11.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a bit of a ritual in that we always have Kathy's cold brew there, which is ridiculously strong. And it's always like the same 10 minutes, walk in, say hi to Shiv and everybody, and then just start bouncing ideas off of each other. So for me, it's more of it's different because I don't try. I really try and make sure that as lazy as this may sound, I try and make music feel as little like a job as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I try and not set unrealistic expectations to myself, but also at the same time that it's a slippery slope because you can get lazy. You can be like, oh, I don't want to do this edit on this thing that I'm sending to this guy. I'm going to have to copy and paste all this and the automation, and I got to do this and this and this. And then the next thing you know, it's been like 3 days and come on, you should send this thing to this guy. And for the most part, I find it works best for me when it's something that I enjoy doing. And that's not to say that there hasn't been times where we've been under the gun and squeeze something out. Like I think a great example of that is From the Kettle to the Coil, and I would also say Gifts for the Earth is like that ninth inning. Like, man, we need a song here. And then some of those things Gifts for the Earth is one of my favorite songs that we have. So but yeah, I'm kind of wandering away from the question. So
no, not at all.
I would say that in terms of ritual, I again, with the two muscles, it would be at home. I have a little studio in my room where like I have a chair and I have this thing and I get a LaCroix and I have some cold brew and I make sure that I have, I've surfed and done positive things for myself physically, spiritually, emotionally, etc., and am in the best possible headspace to let it happen. And if sometimes it doesn't happen, then that's okay. I leave it up to other people. But again, for the band muscle, it's the routine or the ritual kind of just is out of necessity. And I think while it is helpful for us, it is also like we've written records in very chaotic, non-ritualized, where everyone's supposed to be there at 3 p.m. and everyone shows up at 5 p.m. and everyone's over and negative and whatever, and we still can produce things. So
yeah. I've many comments or follow-ups. One is, a lot of songwriters tell me about the role of water to their process, whether it's swimming, the act of how many ideas come to them when they're swimming. They grow up on the water, and how many ideas come to them. Liz Phair, actually, who lives in LA, when I interviewed her last month, she talked about even the stroke. There was I think the freestyle was the most effective stroke, and she loves a good flip turn. Like that was actually in the interview. And, so yeah, do you find that water, being around water, it can be kind of a catalyst for good ideas?
I would say absolutely. As I've only been surfing like 3.5 years at this point now, but it's a very meditative thing for me as someone that always has a bunch of noise in his head and is constantly trying to quiet it down. It's one of the few times in my life where I can really purely be in the moment. And that's both when you are in the middle of a wave or whatever. And then also there'll be these really peaceful moments where you'll just be out there and you'll like, you don't have a watch on, you don't have your phone with you, you don't have anything. And a lot of times, some spots I'll go to, it'll be 2 guys in the water or something like that, 2 people in the water. And it's just you and this very hypnotic rhythmic motion, and you're just sitting there. It's almost like you're driving or something. When you're driving, you're sitting there and your front brain or whatever it is focusing on the task at hand, searching for waves, being aware of your surroundings, making sure like I can go for that, or I should get over this before it, trying to be aware and be safe in the water. And then the back of your mind, I'll always find that I will have 15 seconds of a song stuck in my head over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then because it's just doing that, and the front of my brain is busy with the task at hand, I'll a lot of the times, especially when we were writing, I would have whatever we had worked on the day before in my head. There's one of the last riffs on the record was thought of in that moment of like, oh, what if we took this with Mombasa? Shiv had this acoustic thing, and I had done this very wistful kind of delay lead over it, and which again was something that was I was trying to mimic like essentially like the feeling of like sunset at a beach, and it's a beautiful day, and you're kind of just in this wistful little like gratitude moment, and so I wanted to take those chords and kind of repurpose for them at the end with this big like rush of emotion kind of feeling, and to expand upon it and take it even further than it had been before. I had the idea for that actually with Chris, our bass player, out in the ocean. So,
George, how about you? I guess, do you have how important is ritual to your process?
I think I'm like Kerry. I like to show up. I like to show up feeling bodily energized. Mm-hmm. I like to usually it's him and I kind of have a similar schedule. Wake up, go to the gym, and then come back, shower, change, grab a coffee on the way to the studio. Probably have a coffee right when I get to the studio. A little bit of food, like a protein bar or something. Just keep enough to keep my body quite settled as we start. But other than that, to be honest with you, the ritual is kind of just us being together. It's the collective. That for me, it doesn't necessarily matter, because as Kerry was saying, we've had so many different experiences that I find it doesn't necessarily matter what time of day it is or where we are, what city we're in or space we're at. It's the chemistry between us when we're all settled and as one that consistently shines through, and that for me is the consistent part, is the thing that is always the same, regardless of surrounding. But yeah, I do like to do those couple things and just get into like a decent headspace and a positive headspace, because you're going to run into brick walls, and it's completely natural. And some days you're going to want to say, we don't have anything else. And it's important to be clear-headed about those moments and to not get beaten up about it.
Now, this is a lyric-specific question for you, George. I've found that first of all, I guess when it comes to lyrics, are you a computer or a pen and paper person?
I would love to say that I'm more of like a pen and paper person, because it makes me seem distinguished. But no, I'm not. I'm hardly even a computer person. I'm straight up like notes in my phone.
Oh, you are?
I do just to be safe. I transfer them. But yeah, a lot of it's in the same way that Kerry gets inspired surfing, I find those moments of autopilot to be inspirational for me as well. Say something like driving or running, which I do a lot. And if those automated movements are taken care of and my brain is freed up, typically thoughts tend to flood. And as I'm not one that runs with a paper pad and pen, but I will have my phone on me. Yeah, I'll stop a jog and kind of figure out some sort of like mess, like a quick paragraph, and then I'll keep going, and then I'll revisit it later on, and so on. But yeah, that's definitely it's a lot of the time it's very on the go.
I'd be curious, the cadence of movement ever inspire you with words, or Kerry with music? Like, how much does that monotony inspire you, or the movement, whatever it is itself?
I think a little bit. I think especially with driving, I think because driving for me is so languid mostly, especially if I'm going out, say to Kathy's house, our manager, where we tend to practice, which is outside the city and on like a long stretch of highway. Yeah, that suspension, and fills me with a certain amount of calm, and that calm allows me to grasp ideas, grasp language, vocabulary in a much more clearer way than I would be able to otherwise. And I think so, because when I'm talking about driving, it's not like heavily trafficked.
Right.
I'm not in rush hour. It's a fluid, slow experience, and and one that's typically very helpful. Yeah.
So, Kerry, I guess how often outside influences, things that you, I mean, I think sounds or things that you hear, do you get inspired by and think, oh, maybe that's a riff I can start?
I think, it's never like, well, I wouldn't say it's never. For me, it's not really hearing like a car alarm or something like that. It's like a reverse engineer of that, where someone will, for instance, Shiv having the synth latch at the beginning of the gnashing on the record, where I thought, oh, that sounds kind of like a cool alarm going off or something like that. I think for me, the way that outside influences help inspire me the most is when you can take other pieces of music or things that I've heard on soundtracks or in different genres or something like that, and you can apply the general principles of them to you, whatever your purpose is at the time. So I feel like a good example is I've tried several times to explain to people about the idea of like a death metal hook or like a black metal hook or something like that. Like that there is, if you take if you break down the idea of what is a hook, it's something memorable and catchy that is kind of it draws someone in. It's like a payoff in a song, and you can take that principle and apply it to anyone from Justin Bieber or whatever to Behemoth or something like that. So that is the kind of thing that I feel like I more get inspired by. It will be like this is kind of a cool thing that Massive Attack does here. They're holding the tense bass line while the chords cycle around it, and then after 4 bars or something like that, they give you the release, the relative major or whatever, and that's like a big like welcome home moment. And you can apply that to anything with a blast beat. You can apply, you can take a Cranberries song and put a blast beat behind it, and it will not sound out of place. I feel like those recontextualizing other music is more of where I get inspired from than generic sounds. I almost kind of wish I did more though, hearing keys jingle or something. That sounds like a shit thing. Yeah.
So, Kerry, do you have a lot of, I'm sure both of you, I mean, you must have a lot of discarded ideas that you think, this isn't working now. When you're in a rut, how often do you go back, Kerry, to those ideas and say, let me leaf through some of these, and see if maybe this will inspire me, something that maybe was a year or two or longer ago?
Yeah. It's definitely whenever we're writing a record. The biggest example of that, I think, would be the end of Honeycomb, off of Ordinary Corrupt Human Love. That riff, there's like that big ring out, and then there's like a palm muted, like dun, 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 dun,
yeah.
Dun, dun. That riff is literally from 2009, I think.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I went over to a friend's house and just messed around on his GarageBand, and he had an interface and stuff like that, and I emailed it to myself, and then when I was working on Honeycomb, we needed an outro to it, and I remembered it that I had it. And was like, oh shit, it's in D major, it's in drop D2, like this will fit kind of the vibe we're going for at this point. There's a few times where I've done that, but I think the important thing is it always winds up becoming something other than what it originally was. Like, especially when I'll take an idea and I'll say, hey, what do you guys think about this? And show it to people. And it always winds up inevitably both different, some degree of recognizable or unrecognizable, and then also better than than I was picturing originally.
Yeah. George, I was going to ask you if you have discarded journal notebooks, but because it sounds like everything is in your phone, is there a place where you store all of those lyrics and words and maybe like phrases that you think maybe this will be useful later on? And do you go back to those often?
All the time. Yeah, absolutely. I am pretty good at transferring most of them to a notebook, which I do have. So I keep like 2 copies. But yes, I'm always going through my phone. Yeah, because I'll have like things I can't even remember, or to be honest with you, I get a lot of inspiration when I go through periods of heavy reading, which isn't all the time. It's fairly consistent, but there are times where it really kind of like ramps up, and I'll even create a list of like just words that I like. I have like vocabulary lists. I was like, oh God, it's such a great word. And I'll often go back to those. And especially if I need something actually specific for a part, I'll go back, I'll look at those, I'll think about what can fit, and I can usually quickly become pretty inspired, or at least it will trigger perhaps a memory of why I wrote it down to begin with, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I connected with this emotionally because I was reading this, and it very rapidly just kind of, I find it in my own writing really fast, or I can edit a piece and include it, or I can just do whatever I want with it. It ends up being this sort of puzzle. Taking pre-written lyrics and forming them to the songs that the guys are writing is always like putting together a puzzle. And especially with this record, where we were doing that as we always do, but this time we were focusing on making hooks out of them and making making real choruses out of them. And so it was that process of picking and choosing and puzzling and putting together that puzzle was more intense this time than it had ever been.
Okay, so let's end with this then, because you mentioned reading, and this is always my last question. I found that songwriters are, for the most part, voracious readers. I just don't talk to many. There are a few that say, yeah, I never read. But so I guess, George, who do you like to read? Do you have certain go-tos? Do you go through do you go through an author, or do you go through a genre? Let's talk about your reading habits.
So if I'm wanting like specific inspiration, if I'm writing, especially for Deafheaven, Maria Dulce Loinez is a big one. All of her poems on solitude are very much reflect a lot of things that I feel often, and so she is referenced quite a bit. I was reading a lot of like post-war kind of Polish poetry. This writer Alexander Watt, Szymborska, Milos, the majors, a lot of Lydia Davis. I recently got her like collected works and her collected essays. I think something that was on everyone's list was Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. I felt like that was just a huge book, and one that kind of sticks with me still. And then I was reading a lot of political stuff in the last year. This is another interest of mine. Doesn't necessarily filter into songwriting, but I read a couple Anthony Beaver books on World War II. I read Eric Foner's Reconstruction. I have Manning Marable's Malcolm X biography, and How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America. Harry Braverman's Labor and Monopoly Capital. Just kind of dry. There's only so much like, kind of like emotional reading you can do. Even though I think that historical reading is quite emotional. I do enjoy the kind of the occasional sort of academic thing.
And I'm glad you mentioned poetry, because very few songwriters read poetry. It's very distressing to me. I can count on probably one hand the number who are influenced by poets, but I find I always read 2 or 3 books at a time. I never could do that before. And it was always a 1 book at a time person. And now I make sure I read like 1 novel and 1 nonfiction book at the same time, maybe some poetry. And some songwriter told me that, and it changed my reading habits, because what it does is that as I'm reading that fiction book, that nonfiction book is somewhere, I know, like stewing around. And that changed my reading habit entirely. So do you do that, or are you a 1 book person?
Yeah. Typically, I mean, I think the benefit to poetry is that you can skip around. And yes, especially if I'm reading something that's kind of academic or frankly just depressing, like reading like when I was reading Fall of Berlin 1945, like so much of that book is very harsh and hard to get through, just because the content is so severe. And so you take breaks, and I need a little bit of not that poetry is light, but it's just other and it's cleansing, and the both play off each other quite well.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. Don't forget, you can find all of my interviews with over 200 songwriters on my Songwriters on Process website at songwritersonprocess.com, going all the way back to 2010. You can read them, watch them, or listen to them. So until next time, thanks for listening.